Welcome back. Let's continue with the other half of the time cards. Next we have Edict of Growth, the Time Edict. The effect's actually quite good, putting an enemy unit or spell into its owner's hand, and if it's Primal or Shadow, you put it on the bottom of their deck instead. The main problem really is that it's not very efficient. Costing 3 is quite expensive, but it is still a decent market option, especially in Expedition, I think, where there aren't a lot of ways like that, like for example getting a counter type effect in your deck outside of Primal, makes this even decent in against like non-Primal, non-Shadow cards. And the fact that it doubles as like a counter and a removal option in the market is particularly nice, but it is much worse in Ranked, I would say. Can still sometimes maybe make it into a market, and yeah, pretty clunky. In Limited, it's okay. I mean, it's a bounce spell at worst, if not the cheapest, but can blow out your opponent, deal with some stuff. So if your deck has issues dealing with units or like buffed units with weapons and stuff, maybe this is a decent addition to your draft deck. Next we have Nash Unrelenting. In Ranked, not sure how relevant he's gonna be. There are a couple more options to trigger Master easy with a couple more spellcraft weapons, but there aren't a whole lot. Like there's Vanquish's Blade, for example. That's not even that cheap. There's obviously the new Zodi's Spell Shaper, but they're not even in the same colors. So the 3-cost 4/4 isn't very exciting. If you can muster more reliably, he becomes more interesting in Ranked even, but there aren't a lot of attachments to trigger this. One that comes to mind is like Permafrost in a deck with a bunch of spells, and so the Spell Shaper giving you like 8 ways to trigger Master, but there are so many good options in, say, Elysian in Ranked, that this is probably not gonna make any sort of deck over the other more reliable, more well-rounded options. In Expedition, however, it's a whole different story. Most things that can kill this in Expedition cost as much or more as it, since a lot of stuff deals like 1, 2, or 3 damage, but not 4, and then the hard removal is mostly 4-cost, 1 3-cost card and Permafrost is pretty risky, and there's also Zodi's Spell Shaper to trigger Master, making this particularly swingy, and this also outclassing a lot of other units in this format, making this a premium 3-drop. If you are a unit-based time deck, you basically probably gonna run 4 of these, unless you are like a very synergy-based deck, like the Cultist deck, for example. And in Limited, I mean, a 3-cost 4/4 alone is a pretty great deal, so easy pick in Limited. Next we have Proselytize. That's one tongue twister of a name. In Ranked, it's still decent, like if you care about cultist synergies or like token strategies, especially token strategies outside of Praxis, where you have the 3-cost Grenadine token maker already, assembly line. But yeah, this gives you cards in hand, so for your market and other synergies which can be relevant, and it's overall gives you 4 units, sure, at a worse rate, and it forces you to eat one of your maximum power. It's still a pretty interesting card. In Ranked, however, it's not that likely to matter too much, but in Expedition, this is a powerhouse in the Cultist deck that I talked about and played on stream, for example. And in Limited, I think once again it comes down to synergies. Do you have enough ways to make these tokens matter? Do you have enough cultist synergies? Then this can be pretty good. Next we have Swaying Sea Kirin. It's a 3-cost 2/4 with a solid Master that gives you a 1/1 flying. Not constructed relevant really, but in Limited, a very solid card, especially if you have ways to trigger Master. Like once you trigger Master once on this, it starts becoming a pretty good Limited card, I think. And if you don't, it's still like not terrible. Next we have Wilderness Refuge. Expensive Power Stone that comes with Spellcraft 3 to play a Lost in Mist. So basically, if you play this for 6, you get a Power Stone and a Lost in Mist at regular retail, but you also get the Power Stone effect at a point in time where it doesn't do a whole lot anymore, ramping you from like 6 to 7 or 8. It's not that great, but limited is decent. So this is more like either ramp from 3 to 5, or it's an expensive Lost in the Mist with some added minor upside from the power usually. So in limited, I would say this is a pretty solid card, not great. In constructed, even in expedition, probably not good enough, and outside of expedition, unplayable. Next we have Colt Recruiter, another limited only card I would say, but a pretty nice limited card. 3/3 ambush is pretty annoying to play against, and from the ambush it already goes to like Mastery 3, and then on your turn you sometimes can sneak in an attack for free because the opponent didn't see it coming, and then you have like a 4-cost 4/4, which is very good stats in limited, with the upside of the ambush eating something, for example. So yeah, seems like a pretty nice common in limited. If the sizing lines up, depends a bit on like the sizing in limited, but for now it looks like it should line up fairly well. A lot of limited units, especially most cheaper ones. Next we have Waystone Fragment, basically the new Xenon Obelisk in weaker. Your units have +1/+1 for 4-cost. It costs double time, making it a bit harder to support in like a 3-faction deck, if that's the case. And instead of like the powerful threshold that Obelisk has, you get Spellcraft 3 to play a Gathering Light, which makes 2 1/1 wisps and gains you some health for each unit that you have in play. So yeah, all in all, especially in Expedition, pretty good. Outside of Expedition, still better than Clock if you look for more than just 4 obelisks. And in Expedition, it's like there's no obelisk, so Waystone Fragment is all we have. And in limited, this seems very powerful, obviously. Next we have Voda, Grodov's Listener, the time invoke unit. Although it's a bit underwhelming, like especially in constructed, it's a 4-cost 2/3 with no ability, nothing, just the invoke. It is hard to cast with triple time. The mastery is 5, so if you have no way to like help the mastery, it needs to attack 3 times, which seems hard for a 4 drop that is only a 2/3. Of course, if you have 8 power later, you can give it +3/+3 this turn and get the mastery in 1 attack, but even then, like a 5/6 that late in the game is something that the opponent can often deal with. It's still a 2-for-1, so it's still fine, but I don't see this making it in constructed. Not even in expedition really, it's just too underwhelming, probably. But in limited, this is still a pretty strong card if your deck can support it. Next we have Enzyme of Growth, basically the expensive version of the 2-cost spell from earlier. It costs 5, triple time, and each unit in your hand gets +4/+4 in endurance. About as bad as the other card, except spending 5 power on turn 5 to not impact the board is even worse. And also, how many units do you really have left in hand at the time you're casting this? So this card is utterly unplayable in any format really. The card's really bad. Next we have Vine Petal Creeper. It's a 5-cost 4/4. And yeah, limited only card. A bit understated for 5-drop, but if you can trigger the muster once, it can get out of hand quickly, especially if you can do it as a surprise by like playing an attachment, then attacking and threatening to muster. But all in all, a bit underwhelming of a 5-drop, so even in limited, more of a filler, I think. Especially because how often can you really trigger muster reliably in limited? Next we have Grodov's Favored, another limited card, but this is a pretty strong one, like a 6-cost 6/5 is pretty decent. Sure, we have 5-cost 6/5s in a lot of limited formats at common, but this gets to silence another unit, even one of your own, if that comes up, making this a pretty good unit. Like silence is pretty valuable. This, for example, shuts down the opponent's best evasive unit and gives you a big ground guy to mess with it. So pretty strong limited card, I think. Next we have Majestic Mandrake, 6 cost, 7/5 Overwhelm, just fine. Underwhelming Master, not a great card, basically worse than the 6-drop common favorite that we just looked at, but still a decent playable probably in your average draft deck that is going a little bigger. Next we have ManuS Gladiator Hero, the 7 cost 7/7 Exalted, which is nice because either it beats your opponent down or they deal with it, and especially in Expedition, most ways that they deal with it means you get a 7/7 weapon to put on something else. Mastery 10, play 3 units from the top 10 cards of your deck, then discard the rest is also pretty powerful. So while it's not great, like in Ranked it's not going to do anything, it might be like a minor consideration in Expedition. Like for example, I had someone play this with Praxis Arcanum, giving a charge against me and doing some nice things. In Limited, obviously this is a really powerful 7-drop, so if your deck wants a 7-drop, this is great. Next we have Mountain Goliath, a 7 cost 4/4, and while Mountain Goliath is in your hand, it gets +2/+2 each time you draw another unit. So it's a bit high variance, like if this is an 8/8 for 7, it's pretty good. If it's a 6/6 for 7 or a 4/4 for 7, it's pretty underwhelming to bad. So yeah, not a big fan. If it's in your opening hand, it's gonna be blank until you can play it, but it's gonna be big at least. And if you draw it later, it might just be like a 4/4 or a 6/6, which makes it pretty bad. So all in all, I would try and avoid putting this in my limited deck. And it's obviously not a constructed playable. And last but not least, we have Soul's Rest. We talked about this as a preview already. It's an 8 cost Voidbound spell that lets you take an additional turn after this one, which is a pretty unique effect in the game, the first Time Walk effect that we have seen, and you can decimate to put each unit into its owner's hand. So you can use it defensively, but you can also just use it to get an extra turn, pull ahead of your opponent, or just kill your opponent. But it is pretty expensive. But yeah, I can see it being interesting in like a Praxis ramp deck as a mark card or a melee card maybe. It's a bit expensive and situational though. Like you have to do enough in the turn you play this, because you're not going to have much power left to spend, because the power is going to be spent on Soul's Rest. So you will need to make enough of your turn otherwise, and then also do enough with the extra turn to make this really worth it. But yeah, an interesting card to exist, and a limited even better. Alright, this concludes the review of all the time cards. I'll be back in the next part with the Justice cards as usual, another 2-part video. I'll try to put that out tomorrow. So yeah, stay tuned for that. Until then, you know the drill. Hit the subscribe button. Leave a like if you enjoy the content. Share it with your friends. And please consider whitelisting YouTube on your adblock, or just turning off your adblock while consuming content on here. It really helps us content creators a lot, and we are very grateful for it. And that's it again for this time. Thanks for watching everybody. I'm your host ManuS. I'll see you next time.